Welcome everyone to the Game Disc Podcast, where every week we discuss the past, present, and future of the video game industry. I'm your host, Simon SD, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Noah SD.
And today, we've got a special episode because we're doing the Game Disc Game Awards, where we'll discuss our favorite games of the year, alongside some other fun categories. Then, at the end of the episode, we'll have a special surprise going forward for our top 100 games of all time. We will get to all of that, but first, Noah, how are you doing today?
Hey, can we actually take a break? I'm really hungry and I want to get some McDonald's.
And that's our show.
Yeah, join us next week for an exciting new episode where we get Burger King. No, I mean, I'm doing pretty good. We have a wedding coming up next week that should be fun, should be exciting, and yeah, that's something that I'm really looking forward to. I took some time off of work specifically for this wedding, so I'm really excited to do that. But what about you, Simon? How are you doing lately?
I'm doing fine. I'm ready to kind of crank another one of these out. And yeah, I mean, kind of like you, I took some time off for the wedding, so no work for the next week or so, but be pretty busy with personal stuff. But let's just get right into it. We're not here to talk about a wedding. We are here to talk about the best games of 2023 and other fun stuff from the last year. So the way this is going to work out is Noah and I are basically going to do our top 5 games, and in between each of those numbers, we will do a different fun category. And then at the end, we will do kind of the Game Disc's top game of the year, which will be part of a kind of master list going forward. So before we get into kind of our top games, it was a huge year for gaming. I think nobody's going to really disagree with that. So I think anybody who plays video games, there were definitely games they missed out on. So before we get into kind of our top games and other fun stuff, Noah, what were kind of your big games that you are not going to be talking about today? Not because they're not good, but just because you just did not get a chance to play them.
So there were a couple of games for me. The biggest one, well, I guess first I'll start with the smallest one. The smallest one for me was Spider-Man 2. Great game from what I hear. And I actually do have access to it. I came to America and I borrowed the game. I just did not play it in the year 2023 because I decided to wait for my girlfriend. She likes comics and Marvel. So it's like, hey, this is a game she might enjoy watching. The two other games that I really wanted to try out this year but didn't get the chance is Dead Island 2. Game was announced a long time ago, and I believe that everybody was pretty surprised by how the game turned out. It was a game I certainly had very, very low expectations, like 7 and 6s, but a lot of people actually really enjoyed it. Another game that's very similar is RoboCop Rogue City. That's something else I've heard a lot of positivity surrounding the game, and it's something I would like to try, maybe once it gets a little cheaper, just because I heard it is a very unique first-person shooter. The big game, however, that I don't know when I'm going to be able to play is Hi-Fi Rush. It's a game that seems right up my alley. I love the art style. It seems like the music's great, and the combat is very interesting. Combining the stylish action genre with a rhythm game seems super cool. Something I really want to play, but unfortunately, I don't have an Xbox, and my PC is not really a powerhouse, so unfortunately, I can't play it, and I don't know when I will be able to. But
I like how the big game for you is a game that was shadow dropped at the beginning of the year with no advertisement.
It really was. And yeah, it really was just this game that came out of nowhere. And yeah, but it's from everything I've heard, it's positive. So
yeah, it's good. Spoiler alert, didn't quite make my top 5, so I probably won't be talking about it. But I actually did really well this year. When I look at like the games that I got to play, I generally did pretty well. Part of it was because I bounced off of Starfield pretty quickly. I played enough of that to realize I didn't need to beat it. And then I was able to kind of throw in a couple of other games, but there were a couple that I missed out on. The big one, the really big one for me was Baldur's Gate 3. It was just hard to justify 100 hours for one game when it was such a huge year. I would have rather played 2 or 3 or 4 other games, and that's kind of what I did. So I will not be talking about Baldur's Gate at all. The other ones was Sea of Stars. I heard that was a pretty good kind of modern take on the classic turn-based JRPG, and I was really interested in that, but again, just didn't get around to it. And finally, this is kind of a personal one, just because I think it's a cool premise, but Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. I wanted to check that out, but again, just never got around to it. So I'm hoping to hit all of those next year. I will for sure play Baldur's Gate at some point, but yeah, not anytime soon. Maybe next year. Next year seems a little slower, so we'll see. So with all that being said, now that we know what games we will not be talking about, let's just go right into what we will be talking about. So let's do kind of honorable mentions. Noah, this could be really anything. It could be your number 6 game. It could be a game that you maybe didn't make your top 5 for whatever reason, but you still wanted to call it out because it did something particularly well.
All right, so my honorable mention. Man, okay, hold on.
Your honorable mention is...
Okay, so hold on. Let me get my script. My Noah SDs on... Now, my honorable mentions are 2 games I'm currently playing right now. That is Star Wars Jedi Survivor and Armored Core 6. The reason why I have them listed as my honorable mentions is because I haven't beaten them. I haven't gotten that far. I heard I'm getting pretty close to the end of Armored Core 6, but...
No, you're not.
Wait, you're like, this is a very short game.
It is, but I didn't say I never said you were close. You beat chapter 2, and there's like 5 chapters.
Yeah, that's not too bad for... But the thing is, with Armored Core, you pretty much have to beat the game like 3 times, correct?
You don't have to. You can beat it once, and you will feel satisfied after one playthrough, but they do enough in the other playthroughs, and it is such like an arcadey game, you can play through it all pretty quickly.
Yeah, so regardless of how far I am on my first playthrough, I still do have 2 other playthroughs, which I don't really mind. The cool thing about the game is just trying on the different pieces and experimenting with different mechs. So I don't mind playing the game multiple times, because if there's a level that maybe I didn't like the first time, I can switch my mech around and try it again. But once again, I didn't beat it, so I do feel I don't think I can add it to my list. And Jedi Survivor, talked about it a little bit last week. Pretty much I said, wasn't too excited, played it, the first combat section happened, and I was like, oh my god, this game just feels so good. But same thing. I feel like I still have a long way to go in that game, so I can't add it onto my list just yet. But it is what it is. I'm greatly enjoying both, but for those reasons, they are honorable mentions.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in a similar boat. My honorable mention is going to be, I think it is going to be Star Wars Jedi Survivor also. I have been playing through it, but I'm about halfway, and I really think that this game would probably break my top 5. But without actually beating it, for all I know, the second half could be just fall apart, so I don't feel comfortable popping it on there. As for the other honorable mention, I do want to mention Cocoon, which I brought up a couple of times. That is just a fantastic game that, kind of like Hi-Fi Rush, did come out of nowhere. I personally liked Cocoon better, just because it's kind of just a compact little experience. The puzzles are perfectly paced where they're really tough, but then you're never stuck on one for too long. So if you like those kind of games, I definitely recommend checking out. It gave very similar like Portal vibes in terms of how like the puzzles are laid out. But again, didn't quite break my top 6, but I definitely think, or top 5, but I definitely think it's a cool experience that most people should check out. All right, so with that being said, let's just go into our top 5. Noah, what is your 5th favorite game of 2023?
All right, so my 5th favorite game is Well, let me ask you this. Should I say my fifth favorite game or my fourth favorite game? Because mine is Resident Evil 4, which is my fifth favorite game this year.
Okay, we got there.
Yeah, what a journey that was for me to announce my title. So, yeah, my fifth favorite game is Resident Evil 4, the remake. Of course, it would be difficult to have the original Resident Evil 4 being my favorite game, as that came out quite some time ago. But it's one of the it was just really great. They updated and added a lot to the game that made me just fall in love with it once again. I know that there were some people, Simon, whom had doubts about the relevancy of a remake for 4, but I was always on the page like, well, the original did have that kind of gimmick. It was an originally GameCube exclusive, so they couldn't do, you couldn't move and shoot. That was the big thing. And so in the remake, they fixed it a little so that they added some such, and they also changed a lot of the environments as well. So that is something I just felt like they did a really good job. And of course, they expanded upon the gameplay systems that was introduced in the Resident Evil 2 remake. So for that reason, that is my number 5 game of the year.
Yeah. Hey, Noah, you know what other Resident Evil games you can't move and shoot?
Which one?
Literally all of them except for 6, 7, and 8. So to clarify, my complaint about Resident Evil 4 was not that it didn't need to be remade. It just didn't need to be remade as much as 1 or 6, which, yes, Resident Evil 1, I still think deserves a remake more than 4, but whatever. Mm-hmm. My fifth game of the year was Armored Core Fires of Rubicon. This was a game that I like mechs, but I've never played an Armored Core game, and I actually, until last year with Elden Ring, I had never even played a FromSoft game. But I was always kind of interested in them, and this game just kind of seemed right up my alley. And as soon as I took control of that mech, I knew I was gonna love this game. It's almost an arcadey game. The missions are really short, but it's just kind of twitchy, and you're always just like moving. There's a story mode, but nobody cares. It doesn't matter in the context of the game. And it's got kind of some of that From difficulty, but it's, I think, a little bit more manageable because you have more tools at your disposal. The fact that the game, you can buy whatever parts you want, but then if they don't work out for you, you sell them and you get the full cost back. Really lets you experiment with the game and figure out what build works for you. And there's no right or wrong way to play this game. I know I said kind of last week that Noah was really struggling on a boss, and he was using dual shotguns, and he was like, oh, I just can't, I'm going to switch to my machine gun. And I was like, no, just get in his face. And he did, and it worked. And sometimes, you can just change how you play, and that makes a difference. Other times you can swap out your components. And yeah, it does have New Game Plus and New Game Plus, which don't really change the story too much. The game does have 3 endings, so if you want to get all of them, you should play through it 3 times. But it does enough to mix up each of those playthroughs. So even if you're playing the same levels, there's enough little twists that you don't really feel like you're playing the same game. And it was a game I happily played through 3 times. And I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and kind of going off of what you said, in fact, just a couple days ago, I was playing against a boss that you yourself said it was probably the most difficult boss.
Oh, it was 100% the hardest boss for me.
And so I tried doing my loadout, didn't work. You recommended that I tried something else, and I was like, okay, I'll do that. But I'm also going to use the dual handguns, which you did not like, and because they were a slower but very accurate gun, it just annihilated him. He was constantly staggered the entire fight. So, yeah, and I think that's really cool that not only is it a puzzle game by figuring out the different loadouts, but it's also figuring out what playstyle works for you as well.
Yeah. Cool. All right, now we're going to go into our favorite person of 2023.
So, I actually have 2. And the reason why is because, for me, I consider this could be anybody who's associated with gaming. And they did something this year that really stood out. So, the first one was somebody that I brought this topic to Simon's attention, and his immediate reaction was, no, you only think that because you want an excuse to talk about Sam Lake. And that is going to be the first person that I mentioned, which I honestly completely forgot about. I am a huge Remedy fan, just listen to any episode. And Sam Lake had a very good year this year. He got to make the game that he's waited 13 years to make. He got a lot of recognition. A lot of people are now knowing who he is and are giving him props. And he also we have the Max Payne 1 and 2 remake coming out. He had a very good year this year, and he is somebody that I do want to highlight. No matter what happens to Remedy, Alan Wake 2, unfortunately, the sales maybe haven't been as good as we could have hoped for. I hope that he lands on his feet.
Oh, I'm sure he'll be fine. He'll be fine.
The second person I do want to mention is actually a content creator. We mentioned him before on this podcast. It's Matt McMuscles. He has a YouTube series called What Happened, which is just a very in-depth look at the production behind certain games and movies. A lot of people, when they look at it, they tend to just kind of focus on the emotional aspect, but when he examines it, he actually includes interviews from people who worked on it, and he goes really in depth into the nitty-gritty, like, this is what went wrong during the development, here's how they tried to remedy it, but then here's the reason this thing went wrong. And he actually was how I found out about the Embracer Group's deal falling through. A lot of people, when they heard Volition got shut down, they just said, oh, well, it's because they're making bad games. And in his video talking about the new Saints Row, he actually mentioned that Embracer Group had a deal that fell through, and that was why they were cutting so many studios.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of why Embracer's on fire right now.
Yep.
So my favorite person of the year was a voice actor named Ben Starr. He was the voice actor for Clive Rossfield in Final Fantasy 16. I think he was kind of my person of the year, not only because his portrayal of Clive made him one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. Most kind of JRPG protagonists are either like lighthearted, aloof, kind of goofballs, or kind of like edgelordy, like emo guys, and Clive is able to really feel like a real person. When the game starts off and his whole family has been murdered, he's obviously a little bit of an edgelord. But then as the game kind of goes on, he not only opens up, but he really shows more emotions than like I think any other video game character. And Ben Starr really brought that character to life. I think we mentioned it previously, but I also at PAX was able to go to a panel about the voice acting for Final Fantasy 16, and Ben Starr was there, and he did talk about how his father died during the recording, and it really I think that he was able to draw from that for his role, and it really is just like a once in a lifetime performance. Like the way he screams in that game, it just like makes your skin crawl because you can just hear he is pulling from how he's really feeling during that game. So yeah, and not only that, but he's during that same panel, the guy is just a hilarious dude. Like he just seems like a really good guy, and an incredibly talented voice actor too. And I hope that we get to see a lot more of him going forward. I'll be sure to check out most of the things he does. All right, so with that being said, let's go on to our fourth game of the year.
All right, so my fourth game, I'm going to go with Baldur's Gate 3. Now, this was a lot of people's game of the year, and for a very good reason. This game is it's super cool. The fact that it's kind of, I'll be honest, it is actually a little difficult to play at first because you're so used to games being so strict and so rigid. You play Call of Duty, what can you do? You can shoot people, you can reload, you can throw a grenade. But Baldur's Gate, it lets you play around with that a lot more, and they will introduce a puzzle that you won't realize is a puzzle. I think that the best example of this is that there's a mission early on, a level early on, where somebody is trapped inside a cage and it's burning. And in the cage, just the person dies in 1 or 2 turns, and along with that, you have all these enemies. And so you may think, like, what am I supposed to do? How do I, like, save them? Solution, just get a flask of water, throw it at the cage. And that may sound simple and straightforward, but when you're playing a game, especially a strategy game like that, you kind of think, I need to kill all the enemies, that's my main objective. So thinking outside the box, going into your inventory, oh, this bottle of water, it'll heal me. You can actually just throw it. And yeah, and I think that is something that's just super cool. The fact that they want you to toy around with things, they want you to use spells not necessarily for their intended purpose, but to use them in other ways to solve the puzzle. And it's not my favorite game of the year, but I mentioned it before. This is a game that made devs say, how did they stuff so much content in the game? And that's why. And I haven't even gone on to how playing the game differently and like the choices you make can also affect it. And so like once I said, not my favorite game of the year, but this game did blow up, and there is a very, very good reason for that.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out, but unfortunately, I don't have a spare 100 hours. But I'm hoping to get to it pretty soon. My fourth favorite game of the year was Super Mario Brothers Wonder. So I'm not a big 2D Mario guy. Obviously, I love like Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World is one of my favorite games ever. But and so I wasn't like particularly excited about Wonder because I'll take a 3D Mario over a 2D any day. I just prefer the 3D Marios. So when they announced it, I thought it was cool, but I didn't really think much of it. But then kind of the more I started watching it, and you notice kind of the fun little animations that characters do as opposed to kind of the sterileness of New Super Mario Bros., which were like the kind of 2D Marios we've been getting since the Wii era. I got a little bit more interested, and then again, when I went to PAX, I also got to play this at Nintendo Live, and it definitely felt better than... I was definitely more interested in it than any 2D Mario since Mario World. And I expected to really like the game, but not kind of have it be anything special, but I ended up loving that game. I ended up 100%ing it, and it was not out of like I was never bored while I was trying to 100%. And sometimes if you undertake something in a game, when you get close to the end, you're like, oh, well, I'm close. Let me just wrap it up. And with Wonder, once I 100%ed it, I was like, okay, but now what can I do? Like, that was why I 100%ed it, because I beat it, and I was like, well, I still want to keep playing this game. It's such like a good... Like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it just is so... The levels are so fun and creative, and Mario just feels so fun to move, and the secrets are generally simple enough that you don't feel like it's such a massive undertaking. But then you unlock some pretty difficult levels that can be really challenging. I really got something for everyone in that game, and I definitely think even if you're not generally a 2D platformer guy, this game could probably turn you into one.
Yeah, and I feel like something that not a lot of people mentioning, when I played Mario Odyssey, it felt like every level kind of had its gimmick. There was, of course, the game's main draw was you throw your hat on an enemy, you become that enemy. And because there was a lot of enemies that were exclusive to certain worlds, they made it so that when you became that enemy, it completely changed the gameplay. The most memorable one for me was the tank, which you throw your hat, now it becomes a shooter. And I feel like Wonder did something similar with the Wonder Seeds, where they managed to make it every level had its own gimmick with the Wonder Seeds, and it just completely changed the game. No two levels in that game were the same. And when you play a 3D Mario with a lot less worlds, it stands out. But when you have a 2D Mario game where every level is completely different, I think it stands out even more. And I think it's awesome that people consider 2D games to be not as big as a 3D game. but it was cool that they managed to incorporate that idea and really make it stand out.
Yeah. No, it's an overall fantastic game. That's why it's my number 4. All right, so now going into the next topic, which I think is biggest oopsie. It is, yeah, biggest oopsie.
So, yeah, biggest oopsie. A lot of great games this year, but there's also a lot of gaming controversy, a lot of news stories, and just a lot of general mistakes. I have one, and I actually have 2. I'm gonna say one because
you
I
gotta
feel
pick
like,
one.
Yeah,
because you said you're like it's our person of the year. I've got 2.
That's fair.
And now
that's
our
fair.
biggest oopsie,
Well,
of which there's 2.
There's so many, but all right, I'm gonna go with this. This is the controversial opinion. My biggest oopsie is the FTC's case against Microsoft. Now, I will say this. We've talked a lot about the case, and we've talked about how it was something we are just kind of happy for it to be done. And while that is true, I don't really like how something that's been happening in recent years is companies are just like, oh, let's just buy another big company. It's happening a lot, and I really don't like that. With that being said, the FTC, they really dropped the ball on that. They tried making the argument that Nintendo's console was too different to be seen as a competitor for Microsoft, which it's just not true. And I think the biggest nail in the coffin was they got the president of Sony, whom is Microsoft's biggest competitor. He straight up said, yeah, I don't think this deal will really affect our sales at all or really affect anything. And when you have the biggest competitor saying, yeah, this really won't make much of a difference, it just... How did they... I don't know what exactly their cases were thinking, but they really did not do a good job with that case. And so that's my opinion for the biggest oopsie, is not that the FTC tried to block it, but the case they made for why it should not go through.
Yeah, I don't necessarily. That's definitely a bad one. Again, not that the FTC shouldn't have gotten involved. I definitely think they should have. But I think kind of the thing that stood out to me was when the judge said, you spent a lot of time talking about how this would be bad for Sony, but not how this would be bad for consumers. And that's what I care about. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of sums it up pretty well. Mm-hmm. For me, my biggest oopsie is Embracer Group. Just all of them. So, Noah, you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Embracer Group's business model was basically just, since it had started, it was just acquiring and acquiring and acquiring because money was cheap. So who cares? You know, you can pay off the loan and whatever. And they were just gobbling up IP, and something like that isn't sustainable, especially when interest rates start to rise, which is what happened this year. And you kind of already mentioned it. They were supposed to get, I think, like $2.1 billion in investment from Saudi Arabia. And when that fell through, the company just fell apart. And now we've got studios closing. They're talking about selling off Gearbox, and that company is just a disaster. I think 2024 is going to be a really interesting year for Embracer. I would not bet money that they'll still be around in a year. Mm-hmm. I think they may just end up selling off a lot of their sell it off in chunks and try to recoup something. But yeah, it's sad for everybody who lost their jobs. And it's also sad for fans who are looking forward to some of those games. I know kind of the KOTOR remake was a casualty of this, and also the Time Splitters remakes or reboots. But yeah, so Embracer just messed up big time. And yeah, we'll see if this company is still around in 2025.
Yeah, and going back to the Microsoft Activision deal, something that we talked about before is in a podcast, Phil Spencer, they asked him why, because like the deal's through now, how come we're not seeing all these Activision games on Game Pass yet? And his response was, because you never know when a deal will finish and you don't know what will happen. There, at any given moment, something could happen and the entire deal could fall apart. So for that reason, they didn't really try to focus too much on making the Activision games ready for Game Pass because, yeah, the deal could
they were just
fall
trying
apart.
to get it across the finish line. You're not concerned about afterwards. You've got to dedicate everything to just getting it across.
And Embracer Group is the perfect example of why you don't do that. They were really banking on this deal, so they kept buying all these things, and the deal fell through, and they got completely screwed. So, yeah, it is a pretty big oopsie.
Yeah. All right, Noah, what's your third favorite game of 2023?
My third favorite game is a game that we actually mentioned already, and that is Final Fantasy 16. It's a game that I actually put the most hours into. My second most played game this year was Baldur's Gate at 69 hours. Final Fantasy 16, it was at 71 hours. And I love this game. I think the best epitome for why I love it is because right before the ending, there's a point where you kind of don't want to keep playing because you're worried about the characters. Most Final Fantasy games don't get a direct sequel, so it's like, I don't know who's going to live, who's going to die. And even though I don't know what'll happen, I know that there's a possibility that everybody will still be alive if I just stop. And of course, you keep playing because you can't get to the end. You can't get right before the ending and just stop. But it was a phenomenal game. You mentioned Ben Starr being your Person of the Year, and everybody's performance was great. Ben Starr's especially. The only reason why I did not rank it higher is because, unfortunately, there are flaws. The side quests for the game weren't the best. There were 2 that really stood out as good, but a lot of the other ones were very forgettable. And it was a game of highs and lows. The highs were so damn high, but unfortunately there were a lot of lows, and the lows were not the greatest. It was like, I was never bored with the game, but I was playing for those highs, and there were times where I was starting to lose interest, but then the highs would come and it would keep me back up. So that's why it's my number 3, not any higher.
Yeah, that's a fantastic game. Mm-hmm. My number 3 is Resident Evil 4. I know Noah had said this was a game that I didn't really think needed a remake, and I still maintain it didn't really need a remake. Resident Evil 4 is still a great game to play, the original one, but the remake is, obviously a better version. And they did a fantastic job of modernizing it. I think probably my favorite thing about it is that in the original, the island is generally considered to be the worst part of the game. It doesn't flow as well as the rest of the game, and by that point, you're maybe starting to get a little burnt out. So when you get to this island and the enemies are a lot tougher, it's a little frustratingly difficult, and just at that point, there's no horror left. Mm-hmm. And this game has actually turned the island into my favorite part, I think. As soon as you land, you kind of have to use everything that you've learned throughout the game. So as opposed to at the beginning of the game, when you're in the village and the enemies are attacking you and you feel a little lost, by the end of the game, you know exactly what's going on. And you feel like, yes, I'm overwhelmed, but I know how to handle this because I've been doing it for the past 15 hours. And then on top of that, it, I think, maintains kind of its scare factor the whole way through. Towards the end of the game, there's a section where you're walking through like a room and there's all these body bags. And you know that some of the body bags have like a creature in them if you touch it. So it's just kind of creeping through to get the items, which again, at the end of the game, which usually in horror games by the end, you're accustomed and you're used to everything. It's not scary anymore. But I think Resident Evil 4 not only is action-packed like the original was, but I think it's creepier than the original, and it is able to maintain both of those nearly perfectly. I think this is one of the best survival horror games ever made, which is insane because it is a remake of one of the other best survival horror games ever made. But yeah, absolutely fantastic game, and I'm really glad that we got it.
Yeah, and I really feel like the island shows them taking what worked in the game and what needed to be improved. The cool thing I felt in the island was, like you mentioned, the scare factor does kind of diminish, and so it felt like in some ways they're like, okay, let's make you feel like more of a badass. So now they have these automatic machine guns you got to sneak past, but you still, you know how to deal with the enemies. So now it's like, man, I'm getting past all these stuff. I really am at the top of my game. And they also saw the positive the positive reception the Regenerators got in the first game. So they were like, okay, let's put them in this section, because in the original they were only in like one section, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was like, okay, let's bring them back for this section because we know people are scared of these guys. Let's bring them back for here. And I'm always going to say the village was my favorite part just because the village is so iconic, but the island did show like them learning from the last game and putting in what worked and raising what didn't, improving upon what didn't.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Noah, now on to your biggest surprise.
Biggest surprise? Something that I wanted to spoil this earlier in the podcast because you mentioned it. My biggest surprise is actually Hi-Fi Rush. Because, like you mentioned, it was a game that just got shadow dropped. It came out of nowhere. Tango Games Works, they made Evil Within and Evil Within 2. I think a lot of people kind of pegged them as a survival horror studio. Shinji Mikami, he was the creative director for the Evil Within 1, so I feel like that's what people expected them to do. So the fact they did something completely different, came out of nowhere, was what shocked a lot of people, and apparently it worked. Because not only have I really only heard positive things about this game, I've actually been seeing a lot of people say it's their game of the year. I've seen a lot of people saying it's one of the most adrenaline-filled games of all time. And for that reason, that's why it's my biggest surprise. A game in a year that Redfall and Starfield were considered Microsoft's big heavy hitters. This game they announced that they just shadow dropped is what is essentially widely considered the best Xbox game of the year. And that is why Hi-Fi Rush is considered my biggest surprise of this year.
Yeah, and Hi-Fi Rush was a pretty pleasant surprise, especially at the beginning of the year when it was a little slow. I liked it. I didn't love it like a lot of people, but it was cool to see that from Microsoft. I'm kind of debating what my biggest surprise is going to be. I kind of want to say it's Cocoon, but I already talked a little bit about that. That was a game that definitely came out of nowhere, and I really loved.
It's your dog's favorite game of this year.
It was my dog's favorite game. She really enjoyed watching me play it. Same with Armored Core. It was a game that I didn't really know what to expect going in, and I ended up loving it a lot more than I thought. But I think I'm going to take this time to talk about a game I haven't mentioned at all, which was my probably like number 6 game of the year until Armored Core came out, and that's Pikmin 4. I've kind of dipped my toes into Pikmin a couple of times, but I never really got into it. I played 3 and beat it, and I liked it fine. I played 1 as a kid and didn't like it because I was bad at it. But Pikmin 4, I don't know what it was about this game, but I was hooked. I loved kind of the puzzles and trying to figure out how to get past certain sections. I loved the resource management of the Pikmin. I loved kind of the little dog that you get to run around with, who I think he's able to fit in that Pikmin universe, and all of his mechanics work alongside the existing ones, but he's also able to add a lot to the game. I think this is kind of like the peak of Pikmin. Again, this is a series I've liked, but I never really loved, and Pikmin 4 I absolutely loved. If they make a Pikmin 5, I'll be there day one, but to be quite honest, I don't really know what they could do to improve it, but I also didn't know what they would add a dog to Pikmin 4, so yeah, that was my biggest surprise, just Pikmin 4 being what it was and being just this incredible game that I feel like not a whole lot of people talked about. So
yeah, and I mean, I think it's because a Mario game and a Zelda game came out this year. Those are undoubtedly Nintendo's biggest heavy hitters, and the fact that Pikmin came out and a lot of people liked it. It unfortunately didn't get a lot of coverage, but a lot of really good games didn't get a lot of coverage, and I think it just goes to show, doesn't matter what company you like, what kind of games you like, this was just such a good year for gaming for everybody. And if you're a Nintendo fan, you got 3 great games.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. All right, so now that we're done with the biggest surprise, let's go on to our second favorite game, the runner-up for our game of the year.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead, and my number 2 game was Alan Wake 2. So it was a game that I actually, while planning this, I was like, oh, I'm gonna put Final Fantasy 16 above Alan Wake 2. But I just was like, well, the thing is, Final Fantasy 16, there was a lot of downtime in the game. I mentioned it was highs and lows. And while Alan Wake 2 isn't a perfect game, I just thought the narrative was so good. My biggest criticism for the game is I felt like it should be more linear, but with that being said, just the story in the game and all of the set pieces were just so good. It's something that it's something that like my mind is kind of, there's so many things that I liked about this game. It's really hard for me to pinpoint it, but the music was great, the writing was great, voice acting was great. Everything about it was just so good. Well, for the most part, of course, the gameplay maybe wasn't. It's oh god, it's just breaking my mind, which that's kind of, I feel like, the best thing for Alan Wake. It's a game with such high psychological things going on that it's I feel like an overstimulated dog. Like it's like I'm just like, oh, I want to talk about this and like this, and maybe this wasn't that good, but this was. So I'll just say, wasn't a perfect game, but there is a reason that so many people talked about it, and it did get a lot of awards because the things that it did well were just so good. And along with that, you got 3 new Old Gods of Asgard songs, which is always a plus.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Alan Wake 2. I thought it was fine, but I don't disagree that it did a lot of things. It was a pretty creative game, probably the most creative game of 2024 or 2023.
Yeah.
My number 2 game, runner up, was one we've talked a little bit about already, Final Fantasy 16. I think this is my first Final Fantasy that I played on launch, because I didn't play. I got 15 a little bit after.
You played 7, right? Like the original, the PS1 version?
Not on launch. And I 16. No, my thoughts are all jumbling. So 16 was a game I was really looking forward to. I was hoping it was going to come out last year, and then it didn't. So when it was probably my most anticipated game going into this year. And I think in general, it exceeded a lot of my expectations, and it didn't quite meet others. This is a game that's like 40 hours, and it probably should have only been 20. Noah and I, when we were both playing it, I talked about how the game would have chores where you basically get to a really cool set piece, and then it'd move the plot along, and then you'd have to go back and either do some side quests, or even if it was a main quest, it just felt side questy, which definitely kind of hurt the flow of the game. But in general, I didn't care because I thought the combat was fun enough the entire way through, and even if you got a little bored, you could switch to one of the other like icon powers, and it would mix up how you played. They all played differently enough to where different combinations would really let you tackle challenges differently. And on top of that, kind of like what Noah said, I absolutely loved every character in this game, with the exception of maybe like the final 2 villains. They were a little boring, but everybody else, Dion, Clive, Josh, Jill, Sid, every character in this game. The villains were really unlikable. The heroes were incredibly likable. Some of the most fully realized characters in any game I've ever played, brought to life by just incredible performances from the entire cast. The music too. Like I said, I know this game has flaws. I know it's slow at points, but at the end of the day, I didn't care. It was a game that I just powered through because I just needed to see what happened next, even though a lot of the times I was afraid to play through because I wasn't sure who was going to make it. That game really makes you feel like anybody could die at any time. And I think that that's something that's really hard to do in fiction, and this game pulls it off incredibly well. So yeah, I definitely number 2 game of the year, pretty close for number 1. It's definitely the game I thought the most about, and I debated moving it lower just because of some of its flaws. I'm like, well, there were times where I was bored, but in general, I think that that's kind of it's the game I've thought the most about. And with that being said, I am going to go into our next topic because I have it's our next topic is going to be favorite gaming moment, and mine's from Final Fantasy 16. So pretty much, it's hard to narrow it down, but I think the two are both from Final Fantasy 16. But I think that the one I really liked the most was when Clive kind of like phases his demons, and it's this awesome boss fight where you have to fight through like Clive himself and then his super form, and then he gets his super form, and it's not only just like this thrilling battle where you're fighting this like giant colossus, but it's also so personal where he's really confronting his what he perceives to be like kind of his sins. And I talked a little bit before about how at the beginning of the game Clive is this kind of edgelord, and that's kind of his turning point where he realizes he can't just wallow in self-pity and doubt, and that's when he really starts to kind of become this character who I fell in love with. He's this awesome guy. And that whole just moment with the music, and then you get this cool new gameplay upgrade. It's awesome. That moment sticks with me in a game full of just incredible boss fights.
Yeah, so that's actually my number 2 gaming moment. The accept the truth as it's revealed, because that's what happens. It says press L3 and R3 to accept the truth. Then you press it and you activate Clive's Devil Trigger. It plays Clive's theme music. That is such a cool moment, and it is so great. But my favorite gaming moment is, I feel like a lot of people's favorite gaming moment, which, by the way, I think it's interesting how the game that both of us talked about the most shares our favorite gaming moments, but we both listed them as number 2.
Yeah, that is funny.
And like I said, mine is, a lot of people consider it the best gaming moment, and that's the Herald of Darkness section from Alan Wake 2. It's really cool. In Remedy's previous game, Control, they had a moment where the song was kind of going off. The level would change depending on where you were in the song. And this, they kind of wanted to do something different where the song would change depending on where you are in the level. And it actually was a section they were planning on cutting because they just couldn't figure out how to make it work. So a lot of the programmers were like, hey, we don't know how to make it work. I believe some of the publishers were like, it doesn't quite fit in so well with the psychological horror game. But I believe a lot of the creatives behind it were like, no, we needed to do this. And it worked. It worked really well. I really love that part. I love the song. I memorized the dance. And that is why it is my favorite gaming moment, just because it's such a cool thing. And it's a good song, too. And the song is great. And when you get to the action part of it and it starts playing the solo, it's like, oh, yeah, here we go. And yeah, it's just such a fun little section. And I'm glad they were able to include it in the game.
Yeah, that was a pretty, like I said, I didn't really enjoy Alan Wake 2, but that was definitely the high. And I think that the reason that's not my gaming moment is because I think it actually hurts the rest of the game, because it is easily the best part of that game, and it occurs too early. Whereas kind of like what you talked about, the musical section in Control was towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
So it hit at the right time. I think Alan Wake should have maybe been closer to the end. I think it should have been that and led right into the end instead. It's kind of like in the beginning, middle, and I think it kind of sets unrealistic expectations for the rest of that game. But it is a really cool moment. I did enjoy it too.
And I feel like what they wanted to do was they also have the other song. It's Dark Ocean Summoning, I believe it's called. I think they wanted. Is it called something else?
I don't.
Oh, sorry.
I just don't think that that's anywhere. I totally forgot. I forgot that part even existed, because it's nothing. It's just a cool song playing at a combat section to me.
Yeah, and I like that section, but unfortunately, because of Herald of Darkness, I feel like that did make that section seem a lot less cool. But,
oh yeah, 100%. That, like I said, that's not, to me, that's not a musical section. That is just a song that they played in the game.
Well, it's kind of like the section in Alan Wake 1.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like nowhere near as good as the ones in Control.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of a nothing. But all right, Noah, now that we're done with our favorite gaming moments, what was your game of 2023?
It's something that it's a game I didn't play it as much as I thought I would have going forward. And to be honest, I think it was going to be at the bottom of my list of top 5. Definitely going to be top 5, but at the bottom. But a couple days ago, I went down to a retro game store for a tournament for this game, and it made me realize why I love it and just how great it was. And that game is Street Fighter 6. It's a game a lot of people talked about when it first came out because they really wanted to fix the errors of Street Fighter 5. Street Fighter 5 focused so much on the competitive scene, they really let the casuals drop to the wayside, and Street Fighter 6 really remedied that. And to be honest, I did beat the story mode, but I didn't really care for it because I'm a fighting game fan and online is where I love. And it was my first video game tournament. I went, the community was just so great. I had a guy come over and he kind of helped me learn the mechanics, and it's just like, it made me realize once again why I love fighting games and Street Fighter especially, because when you find something that works and you realize, shit, I am going to win a lot more matches now, whether it's a move that you swap out in a combo or it's just something that makes you a lot more plus and it's a lot safer. It just really, that is where fighting games are at their most fun, when you just realize the things that work. And that is why Street Fighter 6 is my game of the year. I love my fighting games. I'm going to remember every game on this list, but there's one game I'm going to be playing more than any in the year of 2024, and that is going to be Street Fighter 6.
Nice. Yeah, I played. I wanted to get into Street Fighter 6. I wish I would have spent more time with it, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So my game of the year is probably the game I also put the most time into this year. And it's a game that I don't think we've mentioned at all on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. So a bit of backstory. I got my Switch and Breath of the Wild, and my fiance, who we weren't engaged at the time, something about Breath of the Wild just like clicked with her, so she kind of stole my Switch. And because she hadn't played a whole lot of video games, I had to help her out a lot. So it was a cool experience, but it meant I didn't get to experience Breath of the Wild like everybody else did. I kind of experienced it secondhand. So I liked Breath of the Wild when I did end up playing through it, but not the same way as everybody else. So I'm grateful for Tears of the Kingdom that it was able to kind of give me that same experience that everybody else liked. On top of that, the fact that you've now got an entire world above the land and below the land basically gave you all these different environments, and you have to kind of tackle each one in a different way, which really made you think about how you were going through the game, but also see a lot of different cool places. Not to mention all the same kind of sense of discovery on the land. It's just an incredible game. The new abilities that Link gets, I think, even though the world is the same, his abilities let you interact in such cool ways that they can create all kinds of new puzzles with the Ultra Hand and the Ascend, where you can cut through the literal ground. I'm kind of rambling because I don't even know how to like parse my thoughts on this game, because it is just so incredible. The music's insane. There's a podcast called Strong Songs where I don't remember who created it, but he goes through and he talks about why like the theme music is the way it is, and it's so cool. Definitely check it out if you're interested in Zelda at all, or just music in general. But also just the way like the plot works out, it definitely has like the most plot of a Zelda game, and it has the best plot of a Zelda game. The gameplay's as fun as ever. I don't really know what else to say. This is a game that I think if Baldur's Gate didn't come out this year, this definitely would have been number one. I mean, I could go talk about this game for hours, but it, absolutely incredible game. Like I said, game I put the most time into. I don't really know what else to say. Just Yeah, it also got me through when I had food poisoning, so that was pretty cool. So thanks, Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know how Nintendo's going to outdo themselves this time.
Yeah, and something that I think that I just kind of want to say about every game this year, I think it's really interesting how prior to this year, really the only things people thought about in game, in my opinion, was gameplay and the story writing. I feel like this was such a good year for things like voice acting, music, just all these other parts that are so important that now we're paying attention to. Like Baldur's Gate, Final Fantasy 16, Alan Wake, and Breath of the Wild, all games with just such a phenomenal soundtrack. And I feel like now is a year people are seriously starting to talk about it and just realize how important it is. I know that in the past it was something like Doom Eternal had a lot of people really like the soundtrack, but it seems like this is a year where people are talking about multiple games and how great the soundtrack is. And like you mentioned with Ben Starr, a lot of performances were also
a lot of really good performances this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree. All right, so all that being said, that is our top fives plus other fun things from the year. So what we're going to do now is kind of crown what we think the overall Game Discs Game of the Year is going to be. Noah, do you want to say what our 2023 Game Disc Game of the Year is?
Everybody saw it coming. You know it, you love it. Crime Boss, Rockay City, baby.
Yeah.
You want to be a crime boss? Or do you want to rock out at Rockay City? And we're putting it at number 23 on our list. Book it up, Simon.
I'm not putting it.
Okay.
Noah blew his chance. We are going to put Baldur's Gate 3 on the top 100 games of all time. I know I haven't played this game, but I think, Noah, I asked you, because we talked about kind of, what should we put as kind of the Game Discs official top 100? And it was between Baldur's Gate or Tears of the Kingdom.
Or Golem, but you shot that down.
I did shoot down Golem, and I also shot down Rockay City. I didn't shoot down Kong, but you didn't bring it up, so that's on you.
Well, because you like the monkey game. You like Kong. You like
the monkey games. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we kind of discussed it, and while I haven't played Baldur's Gate, Noah, you were kind of able to make the argument that if any game deserved to be our Game of the Year as well as onto our top 100, it is Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, because I never actually managed to beat the game. It is such a content-packed game that I actually never got to the ending. But I think that's why it's so good. We don't really see games with that much content anymore, and we don't see game. The joke in the past was, this game has a morality system. You can either choose to do the blue option or the red option. And this game has moral struggle. Like, this game doesn't really do that. Of course, there is definitely a good option and a bad option, but there are other things as well. It's like, do you want to try to take out this camp by yourself? It's going to be super difficult, but you're going to be able to save a lot of lives. And that's why this game got so much attention, because the creators thought of so many different things. I think another really good example of that is there's a quest where you can steal an item and then give it to somebody, and you can do that. You can actually pickpocket from them, and when you meet them later on in the campaign, they mention that somebody stole it, and it's like, you can't, there's no other game that does anything like that, and that is why this game is going on our list.
Yep. You cool with it at 80?
Yeah, I think 80 is perfect.
I'll play through it at some point, and when we do our kind of consideration and revisit, we can kind of go through and maybe move it up or down depending on how I feel about it once I get a better opinion.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's our Game of the Year. And our newest entry on our top 100 games of all time. And while we're talking about our top 100 games of all time, I know we haven't been doing that a whole lot, but going into 2024, we are going to jump back to that, and we're going to probably get at least a couple of those in the can before we maybe do something fun. Unless we get an idea for something fun, maybe we'll just move to that full time. But in the context of our top 100 games of all time, we have a new way of going forward with that. So the way this is going to work is we now have 2 wheels that we're calling the game discs, and we are going to spin the wheels to figure out what type of game we're going to talk about. So just to give everybody an idea of what these wheels are, the first wheel is generations. So we've got the NES generation, the SNES, Sega Genesis, PC, and arcade generation, the Nintendo 64, PS1, Dreamcast, and PC generation, the GameCube, Xbox, PS2, and PC generation, the Wii, PS3, Xbox 360, and PC generation, the Wii U, PS4, Xbox One, and PC generation, and finally the Switch, PS5, Series X, and of course PC generation. So we're going to spin that wheel first, and we're going to see...
What'll it be? What'll it be? What'll it be? What'll it be? What'll it be?
Oh, that's boring for our first one. But
which one? What is it?
Switch, PS5, Series X, and PC. All right, well, that's what we're doing. I'm bummed because I spun it earlier. I think I got like SNES, and I was like, that'd be fun.
Alrighty then. Well, go ahead.
So now that we know that we'll either be talking about a Switch, a PS5, a Series X, or a PC game, we're going to spin our second wheel, which has Nintendo, PC, Microsoft, and Sony. So that being Switch, in this case, Switch, Series X, PS5, and PC. So let's see what we are going to talk about. And Sony. Looks like it's going to be Sony. It is Sony. So next week's episode, we will be talking about a PlayStation 5 game, which should be easy. I've already got a couple I'm thinking of, and I mean, we talked about a lot of PS5 games this year. Maybe it's an opportunity for another one to get on our list. Yeah. I would have preferred something a little bit more fun, but that's not the way the wheels thought otherwise.
Yeah, and to be honest, I was kind of hoping for it would be a PC game. Be like, all right, Simon, time to play all of Baldur's Gate in the course of a week. But nah, it's one of those things. It's a little boring, but hey, go ahead, it'll be fun.
That's what the
wheel has spoken.
Yep. All right. So that being said, Noah, you ready to? We don't really need to talk about what we've been playing because it's our kind of game of the year. We can just go on to.
I straight up mentioned what games I'm currently playing in my honorable mentions. So yeah.
So then, did you want to plug anything, or you want to just get out of here? Either way is fine with me.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'd like to plug in is carrier pigeons, actually. Yeah, like...
Didn't you already? No, never mind.
I feel like maybe I told you.
I think you did, and it's weird that you brought that up, because a couple of weeks ago, my fiance was like, did they really use carrier pigeons? How did they know where to go?
Oh, okay, I can tell you how.
No, I know how. I looked it up.
Oh, fuck off.
So I'll let you talk. Yeah, I'll let you tell everybody else.
Okay, so how carrier pigeons work is pigeons have... They know exactly where their home is at any point. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. They know exactly where their home is and how to get back to it. So how carrier pigeons work, it wasn't like, send a message to Gondor. So they would go to their coop and then the pigeon would go. How it worked was they would travel on the battlefield and then they would carry their pigeon. They'd be like, hey, it seems like there's a lot more guys than... In this army, there's a lot more guys than we expected. We got to notify the king. So what they would do is they would write a message being like, hey, there's 20 dudes over here. You need to send some reinforcements. And then the pigeon would fly home, which it was raised in the king's castle. So that's where it would fly. And then the person who was manning it, they would see there's a note. They would pick it up and they'd take it to the king. So yeah, carrier pigeons were a great way to send messages before they had telephones. So yeah, if you need to send a message without a telephone, I highly recommend you buy a pigeon, raise it in your home, and then just take it to you wherever you go.
There you go.
Yep.
All right. So now that we got that out of the way, thank you to Pecan Pie on Upbeat for our intro and outro songs. Thank you to Zach Robinson for our logo. Thank you to Gabrielle Este for our editing. If you like this, please follow or subscribe and consider leaving a rating and or review so more people can find us. You can find other episodes of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. I do plan on getting this up onto YouTube at some point. If you want to send us an email, you can do so at gamedisc.podcast@gmail.com. You can send us questions, suggestions, or anything else you want. I guess comments would be the only thing not in there. And that's it. That's the wrap up for 2023. And we will see you all, not next week because we are gone to the wedding, but we will see you all in 2 weeks where we will talk about a PS5 game to join our top 100 games of all time as chosen by the Game Discs. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.